The vault had been sealed for 11,742 cycles. Veshikaran knew this because she had personally dated the crystallized temporal lock 3 times, using 3 different methodologies, and all 3 had returned the same impossible result. The vault predated the Thalmiric Conclave. It predated the Unification Accords. It predated, in fact, every living civilization currently squabbling over territorial rights in the outer spiral. She stood before it now, her 6 sensory appendages trembling with something between academic excitement and primal unease. The vault was embedded in the dead crust of Thol Mindar, a world that had been scoured lifeless during the Sundering Wars, those mythical conflicts that existed more as cautionary tales than verified history. "Professor?" Her assistant, a young Ulmore named Sithik, projected uncertainty through his telepathic field. "The resonance signatures are wrong. This technology shouldn't exist." "Nothing about this expedition has been right," Veshikaran muttered, running her analysis appendage across the vault's surface. The metal, if it could be called metal, didn't register on any known periodic table. It simply was, existing in defiance of logical categorization. The symbols etched into its surface had taken her research team 4 months to partially decode. Most remained frustratingly opaque, but 3 words had emerged with crystalline clarity, repeated in a spiral pattern that drew the eye inexorably toward the vault's center. Kindred, Terra, remember, Terra. That word appeared in exactly 17 archaeological sites across 9 systems, always in the same context, a homeworld, beautiful and terrible, from which the legendary humans had supposedly emerged. Every culture had their version of the human myth. The Korgothi called them the unkillable ones. The Vex Harim whispered of the persistence. The Ulmorai's oldest memory keepers spoke of the compassionate destroyers, beings who could weep over their fallen enemies even as they systematically dismantled entire battle fleets. But myths were just myths. Humans were extinct, if they'd ever existed at all. The Sundering Wars had consumed countless species. Why should humanity be any different? The vault opened. Veshikaran hadn't touched it, hadn't activated any mechanism. It simply opened, responding to nothing her instruments could detect. Inside, suspended in a stasis field that still functioned after almost 12 millennia, was a single crystallized data core. When she extracted it, the core pulsed once with warm, amber light. The light felt alive. 3 months later, and 6 systems away, Zephraelle Kirnath stood at the entrance to Krelvaj War Academy and wondered if she'd made a catastrophic mistake. The fortress moon hung in the void like a clenched fist, its surface bristling with defensive arrays and training complexes. This was where the Conclave forged its elite, where the strongest warriors from a dozen species learned to become stronger still. Acceptance rates hovered around 2%. Mortality rates during training hovered around 12%. Zephraelle had received her acceptance notification 3 weeks ago. The message had been curt, almost hostile. "Your genetic markers match archived profiles. Your application is accepted under Accord provisions regarding extinct species representation. Report immediately." Extinct species representation. She'd laughed at that, a sound that came out harsher than she'd intended. Humanity wasn't extinct. They'd just learned the wisdom of silence. The docking bay was chaos incarnated. Massive Korgothi warriors hefted equipment that should have required mechanized assistance. A cluster of Vex Harim refracted light through their crystalline bodies, creating disorienting rainbow patterns. Ulmarai moved in synchronized groups, their telepathic communion making verbal communication unnecessary. And then there was her. 5 feet and 7 inches of supposedly extinct humanity, carrying a single duffel bag, trying not to draw attention. She failed spectacularly. "By the void," a Korgothi warrior rumbled, his voice like grinding tectonic plates. "Is that supposed to be a cadet? It looks like someone's malnourished pet." Laughter rippled through the bay. Not cruel laughter exactly, more like the laughter of apex predators encountering something so far beneath their concern that mockery seemed charitable. Zephraelle kept walking. She'd expected this. The Conclave species had no living memory of what humanity could do. To them, she was a curiosity at best, a liability at worst. A crystalline hand materialized from the crowd, blocking her path. Its owner, a Vex harem that glittered with martial achievements, regarded her through multifaceted eyes. "Human," the being said, its voice like wind chimes in a hurricane. "I am Kirath Zin. I studied your species' mythology for my dissertation. Tell me, is it true your kind could only perceive 3 primary colors? How did you survive with such limited sensory input?" "We managed," Zephraelle said quietly. "Managed." Kirath Zin's laughter sounded like shattering glass. "Yes, until you didn't, until your species vanished into extinction's embrace. A cautionary tale about biological limitations." Other cadets were gathering now, drawn by the spectacle. Zephraelle recognized the dynamic immediately. She was about to become either entertainment or a bonding opportunity, something for the real warriors to unite against. "I heard humans couldn't even regenerate limbs," an Ulmare offered, his telepathic voice carrying false sympathy. Every injury was permanent. How terrifying, to live knowing any damage might be forever. "I heard they had to sleep," a Korgothi added. "Actually become unconscious, helpless, for hours every cycle. Natural selection should have eliminated them in their first generation." Zephraelle's fingers tightened on her duffel bag, not from anger. From the effort of maintaining stillness, of not demonstrating exactly how efficient a human could be when properly motivated. Her instructors, the real ones, the remembrancers who'd trained her in the hidden colonies, had been clear. Observe first. Let them underestimate. Learn what the galaxy has become. "Attention!" The voice cut through the mockery like a plasma blade through tissue. Instantly, every cadet snapped to rigid attention. Warlord Braxthull strode into the docking bay, and Zephraelle understood immediately why cadets feared him. He was Korgothi, but unlike the others, his body bore the marks of 1,000 campaigns. Scars that hadn't been regenerated, missing sensory spines that hadn't been replaced. He wore his damage like medals, proof that he'd survived what would kill others. His eyes, all 6 of them, swept across the assembled cadets and stopped on Zephraelle. "The human," he said flatly. "I advocated against your acceptance. Your species is extinct because they were weak. The galaxy evolved beyond them, but the Conclave's archaeologists insist on this experiment." He made the words sound like a curse. "You will be given no special consideration. You will meet the same standards as every other cadet. When you fail, and you will fail, perhaps the Conclave will finally stop romanticizing the past." Zephraelle met his gaze steadily. "Understood, sir." Braxthull's expression suggested he'd expected fear or anger or desperate determination. Her calm seemed to irritate him more than any emotional response would have. "Training begins at dawn," he continued, addressing all the cadets now. "You have 12 hours to settle in. Use them wisely. Half of you won't survive the first evaluation." He left without another word. The moment he was gone, the mockery resumed, but with less enthusiasm. Some cadets were already eyeing each other, calculating who among them would be the first to fall. Zephraelle found her assigned quarters, a small cell designed for species that didn't require much space. Perfect. She unpacked methodically, standard issue training gear, personal items, and carefully hidden at the bottom of her bag, a small holographic projector containing messages from home. She activated it once she was certain she was alone. The hologram flickered to life, showing an elderly human woman with silver hair and eyes that held the weight of centuries. "Elder Marivex, speaker for the Remembrancer Council." "Zephraelle," the recording began, "if you're watching this, you've arrived at Krelvaj. Remember why you're there. The Conclave has discovered another vault. They're beginning to ask questions about humanity's disappearance. Some are calling for renewed searches, for archaeological expeditions into the dead zones. We need to know if they're ready, if they've learned anything. The hologram paused, and Maravex's expression softened. We didn't abandon the galaxy because we were weak, child. We left because we were too strong, and everyone else was too afraid. 12,000 years of hiding hasn't made us soft. Show them that, but show them with wisdom, not just strength. Can the galaxy finally understand the difference? The message ended. Zephraelle sat in silence for a long moment, then carefully concealed the projector again. Outside her window, Krelvage's training grounds stretched across the fortress moon's surface, obstacle courses and combat arenas glowing with defensive shields. Somewhere out there, cadets were already establishing hierarchies, proving dominance, preparing for the brutal assessments to come. Zephraelle allowed herself a small smile. They had no idea what was coming. The first evaluation arrived exactly at dawn, announced by sirens that could wake the dead. Zephraelle was already awake, had been for hours actually, running through movement exercises in her quarters, keeping her body fluid and responsive. Sleep was optional when you'd been properly trained. The obstacle course was a nightmare of intelligent design, force fields that adapted to each species' maximum safe tolerance, gravity wells that shifted unpredictably, barriers that required both strength and tactical thinking to overcome. Cadets ran it in groups of 10, with their times publicly displayed. Zephraelle was placed in the final group. She noticed that immediately. The weakest performers always went last, a psychological tactic designed to break those already on the edge of failure. Her group included 3 Korgothi, 2 Ulmorai, 4 Vex Harim, and herself. The Korgothi radiated contempt. The Ulmorai shared amused telepathic observations that made the Vex Harim chime with laughter. "Try not to die too quickly, human," one of the Korgothi rumbled. "I want to see if your species actually bleeds, or if that's another mythological exaggeration." The starting horn sounded. The Korgothi exploded forward with terrifying speed. The Ulmorai moved in perfect synchronization, their telepathic coordination making them a single organism with multiple bodies. The Vex Harim refracted through dimensional spaces, appearing yards ahead of their starting positions. Zephraelle ran. Not with the explosive power of the Korgothi, not with the elegant coordination of the Ulmorai. She ran with something else entirely, the efficient, relentless pace of a persistence predator. Her ancestors had chased prey for hours, for days, running them to exhaustion on African plains. That genetic memory lived in every human, coded into muscle and metabolism. The first obstacle was a gravitational vortex that required pure strength to cross. The Korgothi powered through. The Ulmorai combined their telekinetic abilities. The Vex Harim simply skipped through adjacent dimensional frequencies. Zephraelle analyzed the vortex's rotation pattern, identified the moment of minimum intensity, and sprinted through the gap. Not faster, smarter. The second obstacle required problem-solving under time pressure.
Locked barrier with a quantum puzzle that adapted to each solver's cognitive patterns. The Korgothi smashed through, taking the time penalty. The Ulmorai solved it through hive mind processing. The Vexarim's crystalline consciousness operated on multiple computational levels simultaneously. Zephraelle looked at the puzzle for 3 seconds, recognized it as a variation of something mathematicians on old Earth had solved in the 21st century, and input the solution without hesitation. By the 5th obstacle, she'd passed 2 of the Vex Harim. By the 8th, she was keeping pace with the Ulmorai. The Korgothi noticed. One of them, larger than the others, deliberately positioned himself at a choke point, clearly intending to physically block her progress. Zephraelle didn't slow down. She also didn't charge. At the last second, she dropped into a slide, passing between his legs before he could adjust, and was back on her feet before he'd fully processed what happened. The crowd watching from the observation platforms had grown silent. She finished 7th out of 10, not impressive by Conclave standards, but far better than anyone had expected from an extinct species. More importantly,
Her vital signs, displayed publicly for analysis, showed she'd barely been exerting herself. Warlord Braxtoll stood at the finish line, his expression unreadable. "Adequate," he said flatly. "You did not embarrass yourself completely, human. How unexpected." The sarcasm was acidic enough to corrode hull plating. Over the following weeks, Zephraelle continued performing adequately. She placed in the middle of every assessment, never excelling, never failing. She was becoming background noise, a curiosity that had proved slightly more competent than expected, but ultimately uninteresting. Exactly as planned, what the other cadets didn't notice, what they couldn't notice, was that ancient systems throughout Krelvaj were beginning to recognize her presence. Doors that should have required command-level authorization opened for her. Training weapons calibrated themselves to her grip. Once, when she'd been alone in one of the older armories, a weapons vault had simply unlocked, revealing technology that predated the Conclave's founding. The Fortress Moon remembered humanity, and it was waking up. Then came the announcement that changed everything. Thorvax the Sunderer would be visiting Krelvaj. Every cadet knew that name. Thorvax was legend incarnate, a Korgothi warrior who'd single-handedly ended 3 insurrections and defeated the champion of every other major species in formal combat. He had 300 confirmed kills. 57 of those had been against opponents wielding superior technology. He was, by every measurable standard, the most dangerous individual warrior in the Conclave, and he was coming to Krelvaj to demonstrate proper combat technique to the new cadets. Zephraelle was in the common area when the announcement played. She watched the other cadets react with awe and fear. Thorvax's reputation made even the most arrogant warriors nervous. "I heard he once killed an entire strike team using nothing but a broken piece of hull plating," a Vex Harem whispered. "I heard he can move faster than targeting systems can track," an Ulmare added. "I heard," Kirathzin said, looking directly at Zephraelle with malicious amusement, "that he's particularly interested in meeting our human cadet. Something about wanting to understand why such a weak species ever thought they could compete with real warriors." The common area went quiet. Every eye turned to Zephraelle. She kept her expression neutral. "I look forward to learning from him." The mockery that followed was predictable, but beneath it, Zephraelle detected something else. Genuine curiosity about what would happen when humanity's last ember met the Conclave's brightest flame. They would find out soon enough. Thorvax the Sunderer arrived like a force of nature, given physical form. He stood 9 feet tall, his Korgothi physiology pushed to absolute limits through genetic optimization and surgical enhancement. His body was a weapon system, every muscle group visible through armored skin, every movement suggesting coiled violence ready to explode. The grand amphitheater had been prepared for his demonstration. 5,000 cadets, instructors, and observers filled the tiered seating. Holographic recording systems captured every angle. This was entertainment, education, and propaganda all combined. Warlord Braxtoll performed the introductions, his voice amplified to fill the massive space. Thorvax the Sunderer needs no introduction. His victories speak for themselves. He has agreed to demonstrate advanced combat techniques and, here Braxtoll's expression turned sly, to answer a challenge. The amphitheater buzzed with confusion. Challenge? No one had been foolish enough to challenge Thorvax. That would be suicide. Braxtoll gestured, and Zephraelle felt every eye suddenly focus on her. "Our human cadet has expressed interest in understanding Korgothi combat philosophy. Thorvax has graciously agreed to provide a demonstration. A non-lethal engagement, of course. We wouldn't want our archaeological curiosity damaged beyond repair." The mockery in his voice was unmistakable. This wasn't a training exercise. It was a public humiliation, designed to put humanity's legend to rest forever. Zephraelle stood slowly. She hadn't requested any such demonstration, but she understood the game now. They wanted to break the myth completely. wanted every cadet to witness a human's inadequacy firsthand. She made her way to the arena floor. Thorvax watched her approach with an expression somewhere between amusement and disdain. "You are small," he rumbled, his voice carrying even without amplification. "Your ancestors must have been truly desperate to survive, to persist despite such obvious physical inadequacy." Zephraelle bowed, respectfully. "My ancestors survived a death world for 3 million years. They must have been doing something right." "Survived?" Thorvax smiled, and it was not a pleasant expression. "Past tense. Your species is extinct, little ghost. Let me show you why." The arena's safety protocols activated. Medical teams on standby, stasis fields ready to prevent fatal injuries. The crowd leaned forward in anticipation. Zephraelle moved to the starting position, her breathing steady and controlled. She could feel her heartbeat, measured and calm. This was it, the moment the Remembrancers had prepared her for. 12,000 years of patience, ending here. The starting signal sounded. Thorvax charged. And in that instant, Zephraelle stopped being a cadet and became something the galaxy had forgotten. She moved. Not with Korgothi power, not with Vex Harim elegance. She moved with 3 million years of evolution, every human who'd ever survived against superior predators living in her muscles and reflexes. Thorvax was fast, faster than anything his size should be. His strike could have shattered battle armor. But Zephraelle wasn't where his strike landed. She'd read his center of gravity, his weight distribution, the micro-expressions that telegraphed intent. She was already moving before his conscious mind completed the attack command. She sidestepped by millimeters, using exactly the minimum distance necessary. His momentum carried him past her. She didn't try to stop him. That would be fighting his strength. Instead, she helped him continue moving, a touch to his elbow that redirected his trajectory just enough. Thorvax stumbled, caught himself, spun with impressive recovery speed, and found Zephraelle had closed the distance, inside his effective range, where his size and strength became disadvantages. Her hand moved once, a precise strike to a neural cluster that every Korgothi possessed, located where the primary spine met the combat-adapted secondary nervous system. Thorvax froze, then fell, not dead, very much alive, but completely paralyzed from the neural disruption, his body systems shocked into temporary shutdown by a technique so precise, so perfectly executed, that it seemed almost gentle. The entire amphitheater sat in absolute silence. Zephraelle straightened, checked Thorvax's vital signs with a quick glance, confirmed he'd recover fully, and walked away. The silence followed her all the way out of the amphitheater. The silence lasted approximately 47 seconds. Then the amphitheater exploded, not with cheers or applause, with something far more primal: shock, confusion, and beneath it all, fear. 5,000 of the galaxy's most elite warriors had just watched their fundamental understanding of combat hierarchy shatter like crystalline glass under a hydraulic press. Zephraelle kept walking. Behind her, she could hear the chaos escalating. Instructors shouting for order, medical teams rushing to Thorvax's prone form, cadets demanding explanations in a dozen different languages and communication methods. She'd made it perhaps 50 meters down the corridor when the first whispers reached her enhanced hearing. "Impossible. Did you see?" 3 seconds. Maybe less. The Sunderer didn't even... What is she? That last question hung in the air like smoke from a funeral pyre. What is she? Not who, not anymore. In 3 seconds of movement, Zephraelle had transformed from curiosity to threat, from archaeological oddity to something that required immediate classification and response. Her quarters felt smaller than usual. She sealed the door and stood in the center of the room, forcing her breathing to remain steady. The adrenaline was fading now, leaving behind the familiar exhaustion that came after demonstrating what humanity actually was. The Remembrancers had warned her this would happen. "The moment you show them truth," Elder Marivex had said, "you can never be just a cadet again. You become a symbol, a question they can't unanswer. Her communication panel chimed, then chimed again, and again requests for interviews, demands for explanations, challenges from other cadets who apparently thought they could succeed where Thorvax had failed. She ignored them all. Instead, she activated her concealed holographic projector and recorded a message for the Remembrancer Council. Contact made. Response as predicted. Situation escalating. Awaiting guidance. The response came faster than she'd expected. Barely 10 minutes later, text only, heavily encrypted. Observe their choices. Document everything. Do not reveal more than necessary. Remember, we're testing them, not proving ourselves. Zephraelle deleted the message and sat on her bunk, staring at her hands. These hands had just ended the most feared warrior in the Conclave without breaking his skin, without causing permanent damage, without even truly hurting him. Restraint. That was the part they wouldn't understand. Any competent fighter could destroy. Humanity had learned to neutralize. There was a knock at her door, forceful, insistent, unmistakably official. When she opened it, Warlord Braxtol stood in the corridor, flanked by 2 security officers. His expression was unreadable, but his sensory spines were fully extended. A Korgothi stress response. "Come with me," he said flatly. "The Conclave Council requires immediate debriefing." It wasn't a request. The council chamber was located in Krelvage's administrative core, a space designed to intimidate through sheer architectural dominance. The ceiling stretched 30 meters overhead, covered in holographic displays showing real-time data from across the Conclave's territories. The council itself consisted of 12 representatives from the major species, each seated at elevated positions that forced supplicants to literally look up when addressing them. Zephraelle stood in the center of the chamber, alone under harsh illumination, very aware that she was being recorded from multiple angles. Counselor Vesh Korin, the elderly Thalmyric archaeologist, spoke first, her 6 appendages moving in patterns that suggested deep concern. "Cadet Kirnath, you have created quite the disturbance." "I defended myself in a sanctioned training exercise," Zephraelle replied calmly. "Was I expected to allow injury?" "You were expected," a Korgothi counselor growled, "to lose. Thorvax the Sunderer is a legend. You are a remnant of a dead species. The natural order suggests one outcome. You delivered another." "Perhaps," Zephraelle said carefully, "the natural order is more complex than current understanding suggests." The chamber erupted in overlapping voices, demands for explanations, accusations of technological enhancement, suggestions that she'd somehow cheated. Zephraelle stood silent in the storm, waiting for it to exhaust itself. Vesh Korin raised an appendage, and silence gradually returned. "We have analyzed the combat recording from every possible angle. No technological assistance, no biological enhancements beyond baseline human parameters. You simply moved correctly, every time, as if you knew what Thorvax would do before he did it." "I read his body language," Zephraelle said. "His weight distribution, muscle tension, eye movement, basic observational skills." "Basic," a Ulmorai counselor's telepathic voice dripped with skepticism. "We have telepaths who can literally read minds, and they cannot predict movement with such accuracy. How does a species without psionic capability achieve superior results?" Zephraelle smiled slightly. "We learn to read what bodies say instead of what minds think. Bodies don't lie. They can't. Physics is physics." "This is unacceptable," the Korgothi counselor snarled. "You will submit to comprehensive testing. We will understand these capabilities, catalog them, ensure they pose no threat to—" "No," Zephraelle said quietly. The chamber went silent. "No?" The Korgothi counselor's voice could have melted hull plating. "You refuse a direct order from the Conclave Council?" "I am a cadet, not a laboratory specimen. I came here to train to learn your methods, to evaluate your military doctrine. Nothing in the Academy Charter requires cadets to submit to invasive testing. Veshakorin's appendages moved in what might have been approval. She is correct. The Charter protects all cadets equally, regardless of species. We cannot compel her cooperation. Then we expel her, another counselor suggested. Remove the variable before it becomes a threat. On what grounds? Zephraelle asked. I haven't violated any regulations. I performed exactly as instructed in a training exercise. If my competence is grounds for expulsion, you might want to examine your evaluation criteria. The silence that followed was dangerous. Zephraelle could feel the council calculating, weighing options, trying to determine the least damaging response to a situation they hadn't anticipated. Finally, Veshkorin spoke again. Cadet Kirnath, perhaps you could help us understand. Your species supposedly vanished 12,000 years ago. The galaxy believes humanity extinct. Yet here you stand, demonstrating capabilities that suggest extensive training and preparation. Where have your people been? This was the question Zephraelle had been expecting, the one she'd been authorized to answer, within limits. We left, she said simply. The Sundering Wars showed us what the galaxy valued: strength without wisdom, victory without purpose. Every species treated war as the ultimate arbiter of worth. We were very, very good at war. Too good, so we made a choice. What choice? Veshikorin leaned forward, genuinely curious now. To stop playing a game we'd already won. We took our colonies, our ships, our technology, and we vanished into the spaces between spaces. Let the galaxy think us extinct. Let the younger species inherit a future we wouldn't contaminate with our presence. That's... A Vex Harem counselor's crystalline form shimmered with confusion. That's insane. You abandoned galactic dominance voluntarily? What species does that? One that learned the difference between capability and necessity, Zephraelle said. We could have ruled the galaxy. We chose not to. There's a difference. And now, the Korgothi counselor demanded, why return? Why reveal yourselves? Zephraelle met his gaze steadily. To see if anything has changed, if 12,000 years taught the galaxy anything, if the Conclave's wars have purpose beyond perpetuating violence. The silence that followed was uncomfortable. Several counselors looked away. You're judging us, Veshikorin said softly. This entire exercise, your enrollment, your presence, it's an evaluation of us. Yes, Zephraelle confirmed. Humanity has been watching, waiting, hoping the galaxy would mature. I volunteered to assess current conditions, to see if isolation should continue or if reconnection might be possible. And your assessment so far? Veshkorin asked, though her tone suggested she already knew the answer. Zephraelle thought of the mockery, the contempt, the immediate escalation to violence, the council's first instinct to dissect rather than understand. Disappointing, she said quietly. The word landed like a judicial sentence. Before anyone could respond, alarms shrieked throughout the facility. Emergency lighting transformed the council chamber into a strobing nightmare of red illumination and shadow. Security breach, an automated voice announced. Multiple hostiles in Sector 7, all personnel to defensive positions. The council erupted into chaos again, but this time it was coordinated. Centuries of military conditioning taking over. Counselors began issuing orders, accessing tactical displays, coordinating defensive responses. Zephraelle was forgotten in the controlled panic. She used the opportunity to slip out of the chamber, following the sound of combat.
Deeper into Krell Vaj's corridors, she found the attack in progress 3 levels down in one of the training sectors. 6 cadets had surrounded someone, a Thalmiric instructor by the look of the appendages visible through the combat. The attackers weren't training anymore. They were using live weapons, real killing intent visible in every movement. Zephraelle recognized the cadets immediately.
All 6 had been present at her demonstration. All 6 had watched Thorvax fall. And all 6, she realized with cold certainty, had decided that humanity represented an unacceptable threat that required elimination. The instructor was holding them off admirably, but barely. Blood, purple, oxygen-carrying thalmiric blood, already stained the floor. This was an assassination attempt, timed to coincide with the council meeting when security would be focused elsewhere. Zephraelle moved, not with the measured precision she'd used against Thorvax. This required speed, efficiency, the absolute minimum force necessary to neutralize threats without permanent damage. The first attacker, a Vex Harem, never saw her coming. She struck from behind, disrupting the crystalline matrix that served as its nervous system. It collapsed, conscious but unable to coordinate movement. The second and third were Korgothi, working in coordination. Zephraelle slid between them, using their own defensive positions against each other, forcing them into a collision that she assisted with precisely timed strikes to destabilize their balance. They went down in a tangle of limbs and curses. The fourth, fifth, and sixth all turned toward her simultaneously. 2 Ulmorai and another Korgothi. They'd seen what she could do. They weren't underestimating her anymore. The Ulmorai attempted a coordinated telepathic attack, trying to overwhelm her consciousness with psychic pressure. It was a standard tactic, effective against most species. Humans, however, had evolved without psionic abilities. Their minds had developed entirely different defensive structures, not shields that could be battered down, but simply an absence of the receptors that psionic attacks targeted. The telepathic assault washed over Zephraelle like water over sealed stone. The surprise in the Ulmaray's expressions told her they'd never encountered complete psionic immunity before. She used their moment of confusion to close distance, delivering precise neural strikes that left both unconscious but uninjured. The final Korgothi charged with desperate fury, clearly intending to at least injure her before going down. Zephraelle sidestepped, redirected his momentum into a nearby wall, and applied a chokehold that cut blood flow to his combat brain without damaging anything. He struggled for perhaps 5 seconds before unconsciousness claimed him. The entire engagement had lasted maybe 15 seconds. The injured thalmiric instructor stared at her, all 6 appendages trembling with shock. "You saved me. Why?" "Because you were in danger," Zephraelle said simply, already moving to check the instructor's injuries. "This looks superficial. You'll need medical attention, but nothing critical." "What happened?" "They came asking questions about humans, about you. When I refused to speculate about potential weaknesses, the instructor gestured at the blood. "I think they were planning to eliminate me, then claim I died in the security breach chaos, make my knowledge disappear." Zephraelle nodded grimly. Fear made people dangerous. She'd just demonstrated capabilities that challenged every assumption the Conclave held about power hierarchies. Of course, some would respond with violence. It was the only language they truly understood. Security forces arrived moments later, weapons drawn, and stopped dead when they saw the scene. 6 unconscious attackers arranged in a neat circle, an injured instructor receiving first aid from the human cadet they'd probably been sent to investigate. The lead security officer, a grizzled Korgothi with more scars than skin, lowered his weapon slowly. "Cadet Kirnath, what happened here?" "Assassination attempt on Instructor Thelmyrix. 6 attackers using live weapons during the security breach diversion. I intervened." The security officer looked at the 6 unconscious cadets, then back at Zephraelle. "You neutralized all 6, alone, without killing any of them." "Yes, sir." "How?" Zephraelle met his gaze steadily. "Very carefully, sir. The aftermath spread through Krelvaj like radiation from a breached reactor core. Within hours, everyone knew what had happened. The human cadet hadn't just defeated Thorvax. She'd then stopped an assassination attempt, neutralizing 6 attackers without causing permanent injury to any of them. That last part seemed to disturb people more than the combat prowess. She could have killed them, Zephraelle overheard one instructor saying, could have justified lethal force given the circumstances, but she chose not to. What kind of warrior shows that level of restraint? What kind indeed? That was the question humanity had answered 12,000 years ago, and the galaxy still hadn't learned to ask correctly. The 6 attackers, once recovered, faced tribunal charges. During the proceedings, they confessed everything: how they'd coordinated through encrypted channels, how they'd planned to eliminate the human threat before it could destabilize the Conclave's power structure, how they'd rationalize murder as patriotic duty. Their defense relied on a simple argument: Zephraelle's capabilities posed an existential threat. If one human could defeat Thorvax the Sunderer and neutralize 6 trained warriors, what could an army of humans do? What if humanity returned en masse, reclaiming territories they'd abandoned millennia ago? The tribunal convicted them of attempted murder, but the defense's arguments resonated throughout Krelvaj and beyond. Within days, the debate had spread across the entire conclave. Emergency sessions were called. Military commanders demanded threat assessments. Historians frantically searched archives for any information about humanity's pre-disappearance capabilities. And in the center of the storm, Zephraelle continued attending classes. She showed up for morning drills, completed her assignments, participated in group exercises. She was unfailingly polite, professionally competent, and absolutely refused to demonstrate any additional capabilities beyond what mission requirements demanded. The other cadets didn't know how to process her. Some kept their distance, treating her like an unexploded weapon. Others attempted friendship, though their motivations ranged from genuine curiosity to obvious attempts at intelligence gathering. A few tried to challenge her to prove themselves, but the instructors shut those attempts down immediately. No one wanted another public demonstration. 3 weeks after the assassination attempt, Veshkoren requested a private meeting. They met in one of Krelvaj's observation lounges, a space with transparent walls showing the fortress moon's orbital position and the planet it circled. Veshkoren was alone, her appendages moving in patterns Zephraelle had learned indicated deep contemplation. "I've been researching," the old archaeologist began without preamble. "Every fragment of information about humanity I could find. Do you know how many species remember your kind?" "I can guess," Zephraelle said. "All of them. Every single species in the Conclave has legends about humans. The details vary. Some remember you as warriors, others as explorers, some as diplomats or scientists. But every culture has the stories. Do you understand how extraordinary that is? Most species barely remember their own origins clearly. But humanity left such an impression that 12,000 years couldn't erase it." "We tried to leave quietly," Zephraelle said. "Apparently we failed." Veshkoren made a sound that might have been laughter. "You vanished at the height of your influence. Entire sectors expected human intervention in their conflicts, and suddenly there was just silence. Mysteries become legends. Legends become myths, but they persist. Why tell me this? Because I need you to understand something." Veshkoren moved closer, her sensory appendages extended in what Zephraelle had learned was a gesture of complete sincerity. "The Conclave is afraid of you, terrified, actually, not of your combat capabilities, though those are concerning, but of what you represent." "Which is?" "Proof that everything we've built is based on a flawed assumption. The Conclave exists because we believe strength determines hierarchy. The strong rule, the weak serve. It's the fundamental organizing principle of our entire civilization. And then you arrive and demonstrate that true strength includes the wisdom to not use strength, to choose restraint, to value life even when taking it would be easier." Veshkoren's appendages trembled slightly. "You make us look barbaric, Zephraelle, not through any action or statement, but simply by existing and making different choices, and we don't know how to process that." Zephraelle was quiet for a long moment, watching stars wheel slowly past the observation windows. "My people didn't leave because we were better than the rest of the galaxy. We left because we were afraid of what we might become if we stayed. We'd already proven we could win any war, defeat any enemy, dominate any conflict. The question we couldn't answer was whether winning wars made us worth celebrating or worth fearing. And you decided? We decided that the galaxy didn't need us modeling violence, no matter how efficiently we could apply it, so we removed ourselves from the equation. Let other species work out their own futures without humanity's shadow hanging over everything. But you came back to see if the shadow still mattered, if the galaxy had matured beyond needing external examples, if the Conclave had learned to value something besides martial dominance. Zephraelle turned from the window to face Veshakorin directly. The assassination attempt answered that question pretty definitively. Not everyone responded that way, Veshakorin protested. Many of us want to understand, to learn, to— How many, Zephraelle interrupted gently, how many counselors advocated for dialogue versus dissection? How many cadets showed curiosity versus hostility? How many instructors saw a teaching opportunity versus a threat to established hierarchy? Veshakorin's appendages drooped. Not enough. Not nearly enough. Exactly. Zephraelle moved toward the door, then paused. My assessment period ends in 2 days. I'll be departing Krelvaj and returning to my people. My report will reflect what I've observed here. And what have you observed? Zephraelle considered the question carefully. A civilization that's technologically advanced but philosophically stagnant. That's achieved impressive military coordination, but no corresponding ethical development. That mistakes the capacity for violence with the wisdom to apply it appropriately. That's damning. It's honest. Zephraelle's expression softened slightly. For what it's worth, Professor Veshakorin, individuals like you give me hope. But individual exceptions don't change systemic realities. The Conclave's foundation is violence. Until that changes, humanity will remain apart. She left Veshakorin standing alone in the observation lounge, 6 appendages wrapped around herself in a gesture of profound sadness. Zephraelle's final 2 days at Krelvaj passed in strange silence. Word had spread that she was leaving. Some cadets seemed relieved, others appeared genuinely disappointed, though whether at losing a curiosity or a potential ally was unclear. On her last evening, she was packing her quarters when her communication panel chimed with an unexpected visitor. Request. Thorvax the Sunderer stood in her doorway. He'd recovered fully from their demonstration, though something in his posture suggested the experience had left non-physical marks. He carried himself differently now, less dominating swagger, more careful consideration. "May I enter?" he asked. The request itself was notable. The old Thorvax would have simply entered, assuming his reputation granted access anywhere. "Please," Zephraelle said, gesturing to the room's single chair. She sat on her bunk. Thorvax settled carefully, as if his body still remembered being betrayed by its own assumptions. "I've been analyzing our engagement. Every recording, every angle, every fraction of a second. Do you know what I learned? That speed isn't everything? That I never had a chance." Thorvax's expression was unreadable. "Not because you were faster or stronger, but because you were already 3 moves ahead before I'd finished planning the first. You read me completely. I was fighting you. You were managing me. There's a difference." "Yes," Zephraelle said quietly. "There is." "How many others are there?" Thorvax asked. "Others like you, with your training, your capabilities?" Zephraelle smiled slightly. "That's operational intelligence, Thorvax. I can't answer that." "Can't or won't?" "Both. But I'll tell you this much. I'm not special among my people. I'm average. Competent, but not exceptional. There are human warriors who would make me look the way I made you look." Thorvax absorbed this in silence, then, "That's terrifying. Only if you assume we're enemies. If we were allies, it would be comforting." "Are we enemies?" Zephraelle considered the question carefully. We don't have to be. Humanity doesn't want the Conclave's territory or resources. We've been self-sufficient for 12 millennia. We don't need anything from you. The question is whether the Conclave can accept a species that exists outside its hierarchy, that refuses to play by its rules. The Council is debating exactly that, Thorvax said. Half want to find your hidden colonies and force integration. A quarter want to negotiate alliance. The rest want to pretend you don't exist and hope the problem disappears. And you? What do you want? Thorvax was quiet for a long time. Finally, I want to understand how you beat me without hating me. Every opponent I've ever faced fought with rage or fear or desperate determination. You fought with, what? Pity? Indifference? Respect, Zephraelle corrected gently. I respected your skill enough to take you seriously. Respected your life enough to not damage you permanently. Respected the teaching opportunity enough to make the lesson clear without being unnecessarily brutal. Respect. Thorvax seemed to taste the word, finding it foreign. We call that weakness in the Conclave, hesitation that gets warriors killed. No, Zephraelle said firmly. Respect is the foundation that makes strength meaningful. Without it, you're just a more efficient killer. With it, you become something worth being. Thorvax stood to leave, paused at the door. Your people won't come back, will they? No matter what we do, you'll stay hidden. Not forever, Zephraelle said. When the galaxy demonstrates it's ready for humanity's return, truly ready, not just militarily prepared but philosophically mature, we'll consider rejoining. But that day isn't today. Maybe not for centuries, but we're patient. We've waited 12,000 years. We can wait longer. Thorvax nodded slowly and left without another word. Zephraelle departed Krelvaj the next morning on a small transport, no ceremony or fanfare. She'd filed her departure documentation, settled her affairs, and left exactly as she'd arrived, quietly, efficiently, with minimum disruption. As her ship pulled away from the fortress moon, she activated her secure communication system and composed her final report to the Remembrancer Council. Assessment complete. Conclave demonstrates advanced technological integration, but minimal philosophical evolution since the Sundering Wars. Organizational structure prioritizes martial capability over wisdom application. Individual exceptions exist, but remain culturally marginalized. Combat engagement necessary to establish credibility. Results confirmed human capabilities remain unmatched. Predictive analysis suggests Conclave awareness of human survival will generate mixed responses: fear-based aggression, opportunistic alliance seeking, and studied indifference in approximately equal proportions. Assassination attempt confirms fundamental threat assessment. Conclave majority views demonstrable competence outside established hierarchy as existential danger rather than learning opportunity. Recommendation: continue isolation protocols. Conclave not ready for human reintegration. Monitor situation annually. Reassess in 50 to 100 standard cycles. Secondary observation: humanity is not forgotten. Legends persist across all Conclave species. Our absence created mythological space that may actually serve long-term reintegration better than continuous presence would have. When we eventually return, we won't be conquerors or refugees. We'll be the fulfillment of prophecy. Let them wonder a while longer. She encrypted the message and sent it through channels that would take weeks to trace and couldn't be intercepted. Then, because she was human and humans were sentimental creatures despite their martial prowess, she recorded one final personal message. This one for Veshakoran. Professor, you asked me once what humanity values. I'll tell you now, we value the strength to choose peace over victory, the wisdom to know when fighting accomplishes nothing, the courage to walk away from power we could easily claim, the patience to wait for others to mature rather than forcing our solutions on them. The Conclave measures strength in victories achieved. We measure it in conflicts avoided, in lives preserved, in futures. left open for possibilities we couldn't predict. When your civilization learns that distinction, truly internalizes it, makes it foundational rather than exceptional, humanity will return. Until then, we'll be watching, hoping, waiting. Tell them we're not angry, just disappointed. And unlike anger, disappointment comes from caring enough to expect better. We still expect better. Eventually, you'll deliver it. She sent that message unencrypted, knowing it would spread throughout the Conclave, becoming another legend about the mysterious humans who could have ruled the galaxy but chose not to. The transport jumped to hyperspace, carrying humanity's emissary away from Krelvaj, away from the Conclave, back toward the hidden colonies where her people maintain their patient vigil. Behind her, in the Fortress Moon's archives, Veshakoran received the message and wept. 6 appendages covering her sensory organs as she processed the profound uneasiness of failing a test she hadn't known was being administered. And in the deepest vaults of Krelvaj, ancient security systems finally recognized what they'd been waiting 12,000 years to detect: a human genetic signature, properly verified, access granted to knowledge locked since the Sundering Wars. The systems activated, uploading their contents to every connected database across the Conclave's networks before security could stop them. Within hours, every species in the Conclave had access to humanity's true history. Not legends, not myths, documentation, combat recordings, diplomatic archives, scientific achievements, and most devastating of all, the records of humanity's final debates before disappearing. Debates where they seriously questioned whether the galaxy deserved their continued participation, whether their presence did more harm than good, whether the kindest thing they could do was simply leave. The galaxy learned that humanity hadn't been conquered or fled or died out. They'd just been waiting for everyone else to grow up. And they were still waiting.